for Children's Church ABC that you have this opportunity. So kids are released at this time. All right, this morning we are starting a new sermon series, and this sermon is called Doctrina de Creatione. That's probably the only time I'm going to say that, but it's kind of has that Latin feel. The idea is that these are ancient doctrines, the ground, the bedrock of faith, and that's what we're going to be looking at through this time here today. Since the very beginning of Christianity, one of the certain challenges of the gospel is getting people to grasp the full power of the gospel. That being said, perhaps a greater challenge that Jesus' disciples have faced is not just persuading people to believe in the gospel, but getting them first to listen to the gospel, to hear the gospel, getting the gospel to them. The vast majority of time and effort and money and thought in Christianity has been spent in making sure we're right about our thinking. Seminaries and churches and councils and denominations and books and podcasts and radio programs have consumed enormous resources to defend our interpretation of the Bible. And that defense is often against other Christians who are in different factions from our own. And in many ways, we have been spinning our wheels within Christianity when the majority world out there is waiting to hear the gospel. Because of that, because the vast majority of the world has not heard the gospel, here's what this has resulted in. The world sees Christianity like this. Each of those pieces of the puzzle might look beautiful in and of itself, but the world sees Christianity as this scattered mix of pieces that don't solve the whole thing for them. That's what they look at. That's what they say. That being said, when we put two of those pieces of the puzzle together, or 3 or 10 of those pieces together, what do we see? We start to see something beautiful out of the middle of that. Not just little gems, but the whole thing begins to build and take shape as a story. As we put together more and more, we're no longer just answering questions that kept us from believing at one time, but instead, we're enjoying the beauty of what we're seeing come together. We relish the beauty of the mosaic that we are seeing take shape. So this sermon series that we're starting is intended to put those pieces together. That being said, this puzzle isn't meant to stop with you. I don't want this series to be another dead-end sermon series where it just fills your mind and stops right there. This sermon series is for you to share the beauty and the joy of faith with others. It's intended to encourage you, to strengthen you, to build up your foundation so that you can be equipped to share this with others. So we have 5 sermons that we're going to look at. By the way, I'm going to leave this here today because I want us all to look at what the world sees Christianity as. But next week, I'm going to put this in the Connect corner back there so you can arrive a few minutes early, and I want to challenge each of you to put together 2 pieces. Just put together 2 pieces, make one connection, and together we'll see this puzzle take shape. And it will be a beautiful mosaic, a beautiful picture that we can all enjoy. As we see it come together, we can see the totality of our faith together. So these 5 sermons are going to explore reasons to believe. I want to challenge you to find something every week in these sermons that you will share. Be one of the arguments, one of the proofs, or one of the ways of thinking that John and I will present to you over these next 5 weeks. Think of it. If each of us takes something from each sermon to those people around us, and we have a church of about 100 people, so if we have 5 sermons, that's going to be 500 new people that hear testimony about the truth of the gospel. Think of the impact that could make if we actually take this seriously. So I want to challenge you to think as we go through this, as we go through each of these sermons, to find something that you can share with someone else. Will you take this challenge? Will you find something in all of these reasons to believe for someone else to believe? The world needs you to take this challenge. All of that being said, this is what the next 5 weeks look like. The first week, today, we are looking at Doctrina de Creatione. So I did say it 2 times. The doctrine of creation is what it is fundamental to Christianity and Judaism. In fact, God repeatedly sets himself apart from all other gods because he is the one who created everything. Beginning and the end. He's the one that knows it all, from the very start to the very end. He is the God of creation. Next week we'll look at Doctrina de Deo, which is the doctrine of God. When we look at the doctrine of God, we are faced with the question of morality, because God is the ultimate good. I'll share a quick story that I didn't expect to be sharing, but I've already shared from this sermon series with someone last night at Starbucks as I was writing this sermon series. So I had my Kindle open here that showed my Net Bible, and a young man, probably in their 20s, young man, young woman, sat down right next to me. And they started talking about his struggles. He just immediately opened up with his struggles about faith, sharing with his friend. Maybe he hadn't seen her for a while, I don't know, but sharing with her that he's struggling with faith. And I was like, okay, that would be rude for me to just jump right in and offer a bunch of answers to them. I mean, but I was tempted. I was so tempted. I was like, okay, Lord, I have to put on my earbuds because I'm so distracted I can't continue to write. And so I did. I put on my earbuds and I prayed silently. I said, Lord, I just pray that you will open the door if I'm to share anything to them. And about 45 minutes later, here was the door that opened up. She leaned over and said, excuse me, because I had my earbuds and I couldn't hear her. And she said, what is that you're writing? I mean, is that an invitation or what? And I said, well, I'm writing a sermon. I'm a pastor, and I'm starting a new sermon series on apologetics so that people can find, people that are struggling with their faith can find the answers that they need. And at just this time, the young man's jaw just dropped open. He said, that's exactly what we were just talking about. And so for the next 45 minutes, I talked with them, and I reasoned with them, and I walked him through a number of answers, a number of things that you'll even hear today that will strengthen, Lord willing, your faith. But one of those was all about this issue of morality. How do we face a world that has sin and evil in it? How do we explain that? How do we understand it? Apologetics has an answer. Doctrina de Homine is the doctrine of humanity that looks at where we are and why we're here. The fact that we are here shows intelligent design, but it also shows purpose. And so we'll look at what's called the teleological argument for faith. Doctrina de Cristo is what Pastor John will be teaching on. He'll be preaching while I'm away on vacation to look at the fact of Jesus' resurrection. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, it doesn't matter at all what he said. On the other hand, if Jesus rose from the dead, then what he said is the most important utterance in all of humanity's history. It's that important. So it hinges on that one thing. Did Jesus rise from the dead? And then lastly, we'll finish up with Doctrina de Fide, which is the doctrine of faith. We look at the matter of faith and why the Lord chose to use faith instead of making us puppets that just had to believe. We will see that we live by faith all the time, and we make reasonable calculations of faith in all that we do. So, we got some exciting weeks ahead of us. At least they're exciting for me. I hope they are for you. And they start today with putting up your dukes. Okay, now, yes, I recognize that that's a very old phrase. putting up your dukes, sort of thing. And it's only said by old people. Guilty as charged. What can I say? I'm old. If you haven't gathered yet, we're going to be focusing on apologetics over these next 5 weeks. And for me, this is very exciting because I'm at the final stage of getting my doctorate in Christian apologetics and culture. It's been years in the making, and I've read well over 10,000 pages of apologetics and philosophy and literature and logic. So obviously I enjoy this stuff, or at least I did at the start, right? I might be burned out by at this point. I'm well into it. No, fortunately for you, I'm not burned out on it. It is something that I still enjoy. At least you can know that I did enjoy this, and in fact that I do right now. Fortunately for us, that is not the case, and I still do enjoy apologetics, so you'll get some fresh material coming out here. So what is apologetics? In order to answer this, I'm going to use a few verses that we explored a few months ago from Philippians chapter 1. And they read like this. It is right for me to feel this way about you all, because I hold you in my heart. For you are all partakers with me of grace, both in my imprisonment and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel. Skipping ahead to verse 12. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Well, we know what happened to him. He was arrested. He was held in prison. He was taken to Rome. He was in Caesar's household. Okay? That's what happened to him. And he's saying it helped. It served to advance the gospel so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. So 2 times in that passage, in these verses, we have this word defense. And that's the word apologia. Apologia, if you pronounce it in Greek. It means defense. It's the same word that we get apology from, and apologetics. Now, some people might be saying, well, the Bible needs no apology. Why are you apologizing for the Bible? That's not what it is. Rest assured that we are not apologizing for the Bible with apologetics. In fact, what we're doing is what Paul used this for, is defending the Bible, defending the truth of the gospel. So keep in mind, the next time that someone apologizes to you, what they're actually doing is defending themselves. That's what's happening here. Apologizing doesn't necessarily mean they're very contrite and they're very sorry for what they did. Not necessarily. It could be that they're just putting up a solid defense against you. So an apology is a defense. And the words that Paul uses in Philippians 1 are very clear to bring this out, that they explain 2 purposes for apologetics. The first one is this, defense. We defend the Bible against accusations or things intended to tear it down from the outside. Okay? And that's what we experience in our age today. We experience a lot of people coming at Christianity explaining why it can't be true, why it's ridiculous, why it's absurd to have faith. The second reason for apologetics is confirmation. That is the strengthening of the faith of those that are inside the faith. So for you, apologetics as believers has a purpose, and that is to strengthen you as believers. When I present to you arguments for the faith in Jesus, as I will today, they are arguments that can be used as evidence for outsiders, so that those outsiders will believe, so that we'll remove the stumbling block, so to speak. That believing in Jesus is rational. It's not absurd. At the same time, when I present those arguments to you, for you as a believer, they can be something that strengthens your faith in Jesus, that make you understand your faith is rational. It's not absurd. That's an important thing too. Faith and reason are not at odds with one another. Faith is reasonable. We'll get into more on the matter of faith itself in our last sermon when we looked at Doctrine de Fide in November. Missionaries in the Middle East, one of our team leaders described the situation of the country that we were in, the United Arab Emirates. There were so few believers from the United Arab Emirates, I actually only met 3. The entire time that we were there, I only met 3 believers that were from the United Arab Emirates. So my team leader encouraged us and said, at this point, we're not at the point of harvesting. It's kind of harvest time, so we can understand this analogy here. We're not at the point of harvesting. We're not even at the point of watering. We're not at the point of planting seeds. We're at the point of removing rocks so that the soil can be tilled. Isn't that a good way of putting it? That we're removing rocks, and that's what apologetics can do. That's what we're going to do over these next 5 weeks. There's a lot like that's a lot like what we do with apologetics. People don't believe in Jesus because of the rational reasons that they hear in apologetics. Let me make that clear again. All these reasons aren't intended to force someone to believe. Rather, they believe in Jesus because of who Jesus is. But they have to have these stumbling blocks removed that prevent them from believing in the first place. They have to have the Holy Spirit that opens their eyes to this truth. Apologetics is simply about moving rocks and preparing the soil. A way to think about this is to ask yourself, what is the stumbling block that you are dealing with even right now that's preventing you from fully committing yourself in your faith with Jesus? Or, if not for you, how about for your friends or your family members? Picture someone in your mind that doesn't know Jesus at this point and ask, what is the stumbling block that needs to be removed for this person to believe? Move that rock. Then ask, what's the next stumbling block? And move that rock. Help that person to see the truth of the faith in Christ. In this way, you're partaking in grace by defending and confirming the gospel. Now, a lot of people talk about the miracle of birth. Well, today we're going to talk about the miracle of star birth. The miracle of star birth, and I'm going to introduce a couple of big words to you here today. Today's text that we're going to be looking at is not a typical text for creation, but it is such an awesome text, though, that I want to read it so that you can be as excited about it as I am. So, as we normally do, we'll have you turn to Isaiah 42, or you can look up above, and we'll read this together. I will read the odd verses, and you can read the even verses as we read through today's text. Thus says God, the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it, and spirit to those who walk in it.
I am the Lord. I call you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you a covenant for the people, a light for the nations.
To open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison those who sit in darkness.
I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to our idols.
Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Now I'm going to start off, as I mentioned, throwing out 2 big words for you. And the first one is presuppositionalism. That's a $10 word, right? And it means this, to believe or suppose in advance. And you can read the quote there about passing moral judgments and presupposing that something is true. This is a mode of apologetics that basically says people know in their hearts the truth of the gospel. And so it's just a matter of revealing it to them. Whatever is blocking their view, it's a matter of taking that out of the way so that they can see, removing the blinders from their eyes. Just as we read from Isaiah, that it's causing the blind eyes to see. And in fact, Romans chapter 1 shows that presuppositionalism is true. So let's take a look at Romans chapter 1. This is a familiar passage, I think, for you. You'll recognize this. For what can be known about God is plain to them. That is, those people that are rejecting God. What can be known about God is plain to them because for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So Paul uses that as a basis to point out these people are without excuse. They're without excuse because the truth is in their minds already. It is clear in everything that has been created. All the earth and the stars and the sky that we see around us that shows us that God created us. And so it is obvious. The truth is there in people's minds. They actually know the truth, but they suppress the truth because they want to be masters of their own universe. One of the ways that we presuppose truth is that we recognize that there is something rather than nothing. Now, that's kind of a philosopher's way of thinking about things, but think about it this way. Why is there anything? There could have just as easily been nothing. You know, why is there a creation? Why is there any material matter at all? It could have all simply collapsed and not been in existence at all. The only way that something could exist for all eternity, now if that's the other belief, is that we think, oh, everything has just existed as it is for all eternity. There are some people, even some bright minds, who did believe this. In fact, Albert Einstein, this was the common teaching at that time. It was called steady state. Everything is in this steady state. It's always been this way. And so people believed that the universe was eternal. And Einstein, when he developed his special theory of relativity, he was like, wait a minute, this seems to indicate that the universe is expanding. But that's not what we believe. And so he fudged his theorem, his special theory of relativity, in order to make it accommodate to the steady state idea that everything has existed for all time. He said that was his biggest mistake in all of his career. And we kind of look at things like this, or like a cell phone. Now, a cell phone is not a necessary being. Okay? It doesn't have to exist. But if you think about something that has existed for all eternity, it must be a necessary thing. It must be what's there. Now, I know there are some millennials and Gen Z people saying, what, cell phones aren't necessary beings? Yes, there was a time actually before cell phones, when cell phones did not exist. And you can see that everything that does have a beginning cannot be a necessary being. It doesn't just have to be there for all existence. And that's one of the stumbling blocks. And some people are believing, and they're like, wait a minute, I can believe that God created everything from nothing, but there was really a time when cell phones didn't exist? Yes, there was such a time. The fact that the universe had a beginning shows that it is not a necessary being or object. Instead, it is what is called a contingent being. That means that somebody else had to create it. Somebody else had to bring it into being. Okay? It is dependent on something else to bring this into being. And here's where the second big word comes in. It's the cosmological argument. That's what I'm introducing to you. Cosmological means that it pertains to the theory of the material universe. Cosmos, that's the universe, and logikos is the theory of how we think about things. And so that's what this is. It's proof, the cosmological argument, and there are a number of them. Cosmological arguments are proof about what the Bible says about there being a beginning, about God creating things. explanation that you don't have to believe, I mean, as I get into this here, you don't have to believe in evolution in order to believe that the universe had a beginning. So, when I say Big Bang throughout, this sermon or whatever, it is meaning that it's referring to the creation of the universe. It means the same thing as saying creation, because I believe that God did it. Don't think that I'm an evolutionist. I don't want you to come away with that sort of idea. Okay, I'm not. But, now we get back on track here. Edwin Hubble was a man in 1929. He looked at all of the different parts of the universe and the different stars that we see in our own galaxy, and then other galaxies that we see, globular clusters, and all of these different things. And he saw that everything is moving away from itself, away from everything else. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't understand that. Why would that be? By noting the red shift. Now, you're familiar with the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect of a train coming by, it sounds higher pitched when it comes close to you, and then lower pitched when it goes past you. And the same thing happens with a star, although you don't hear the star moving by. But you hear the train, and the train is, right? That's what happens with the Doppler effect. And the same thing happens with the light. There's red light behind the star and blue light in front of the star where it's moving in that direction. So here's another way of looking at it. So I have a balloon here this morning, and you can see that the mass of the balloon is, it can be very small right there. I can pitch that up very small. And then as I blow this up, what you'll see here is that it gets larger, and all of that mass is moving away from that middle point that was there. And now, if I put on here, I'm going to put an A for the Andromeda Galaxy. And I'll put M for the Milky Way. And I'll put the S for the Sombrero Galaxy. Yes, there is such a thing. You can't guess what it looks like. There's Andromeda, Milky Way, and Sombrero galaxies. Now, watch. As time goes by and the expansion continues to happen, all of them move farther and farther away. And so that's how all of these things can move away, and that's what Edwin Hubble discovered. I don't think he discovered that, but that's just a kind of an extra that comes along with it. So, by the way, Pastor John wants me to invite everybody to a water balloon fight in his office after the service. So we're all equipped for that. Moving on here, here's a modern-day apologist, William Lane Craig, explaining what is called the Kalam cosmological argument. As I mentioned, there were a number of different cosmological arguments. This is one of them that says that everything that has a beginning has a cause.
What is the Kalam cosmological argument? Let's
you can skip ahead to 55 seconds.
To speak for himself. A withering critique of their views entitled "The Incoherence of the Philosophers." In this fascinating book, he argues that the idea of a beginningless universe is absurd. The universe must have a beginning, and since nothing begins to exist without a cause, there must be a transcendent creator of the universe. Al-Ghazali frames his argument very simply, I quote, "Every being which begins has a cause for its beginning. Now the world is a being which begins. Therefore, it possesses a cause for its beginning." So once again, we can summarize Al-Ghazali's argument in three simple, easily memorizable steps. 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore, the universe has a cause.
All right. So let's stop there. That's the basic cosmological argument that explains that everything has to have a beginning. And if it has to have a beginning, that beginner, that cause, that everything that has a beginning, that cause is outside of what is being caused, right? And so God cannot be something that there's a being that is confined to the universe itself, because God is outside of the universe. God has to be outside of the universe in order to create the universe. Now, one thing that tells us is that the power of God is beyond everything in the universe, right? He's more powerful and more potent than all the accumulated power in the universe. We call that omnipotent, that God has all power. We have another thing that says is that God is outside of this universe that he has created, this balloon that he has created, and so he can see all of it at one time. He knows everything about it, every little facet of it at one time. So God knows everything about the universe. We call that omniscience. And then we know as well that God is outside of this balloon because he created this, and so he is seeing the beginning and the end all at one time. And places because he can operate in any part of that because he is omnipresent. So right there we have just explained the three main ideas about who God is from the cosmological argument. Do you see the value of what this can be? Now here are some other, some even biblical claims for the cosmic expansion. The expansion of the universe, the idea that everything has a beginning. The universe had a beginning, so it had a cause. It's just to show you that this is throughout the Bible. 11 different places where this is brought up and it's there. We are engaging in the defense and the confirmation of the gospel. Now, let's meet Goldilocks. If you thought that those claims of the cosmological argument were mind-blowing, fasten your seatbelts because it only gets more powerful from here. And this is where enter Goldilocks. You're familiar with this story of Goldilocks and the three bears, how she happens upon a bear's empty house, and as most people do when they walk into someone's house that they don't know, they help themselves to some porridge, and then they help themselves to a seat and a chair. And one of those chairs is a little bit hard, and the porridge, some of it's too hot, and then she goes and lies down for a nap. I mean, what else would you do when you're breaking and entering? So lies down for a nap and tries 3 different beds. Takes plenty of time to find just the right bed. Oh, this one's too big, this one's too small, and so on. So you know Goldilocks and the story here. In each of those, she finds the one that is just right. She finds the porridge that is just right, the chair that is just right, and the bed that is just right. Back in high school physics, you were likely introduced to the electromagnetic force constant. Anybody remember that? Yeah. You remember the words? Yes, exactly. I'm sure. I doubt that anybody here will be able to recite it off the top of their mind, but that constant keeps electrons from falling into the nucleus of every atom in the universe. It's a pretty important thing, right? I mean, if all the electrons collapse into the nucleus, I mean, and that's where they're attracted to because they're electric negative charge, and then you've got a positive nucleus, they should naturally collapse. But something out there is holding them all apart. Then you also are probably have heard of the gravitational force constant, which somehow draws objects of mass together. The phenomenal part is not that each one of these constants exists. I mean, that's phenomenal in itself, yes. But the phenomenal part is the ratio between the electromagnetic force constant and the gravitational force constant. No, this phenomenal part is so phenomenal because you see, if that ratio was increased by 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, then the Earth wouldn't have formed as it is. Life would not have happened because only stars that are superstars would have formed. If it was less than 1 in 10 to the 40th power, it would be so small that not have formed because it would have only made these white dwarf stars that you heard about. Well, just how much is 10 to the 40th power? Well, let me see. I've got here a dime. Okay, it's the smallest coin that we have in our currency. All right, I've got a dime. If you take the entire United States and cover it with dimes and continue to stack them up to the height of the moon, that's 10 to the 40th. Now, you take a red marker like this, and you put a little X on there, and throw this dime into the mix, into that huge thing, and then you have Leonie swim through that dime, and she has one chance to pick that one dime. That's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. And it really should blow your mind. That is just one of 35 different fine-tuning requirements for life. Here, take a look at a few of the others. And I'm not gonna stop with each of these. John is just gonna buzz through these because with each of them, there are so many. But the electromagnetic force constant, as we talked about. How about the expansion rate of the universe? How about the entropy level of the universe? How about the age of the universe? The average distance between galaxies? I mean, we could just skip through these. 35 of these. No, that dime that I tossed out there, that's just regarding one. One of those 35. Do you get the sense that God made us for a purpose? God's universe, just perfect to be able to foster life. Now, all of those things, I mean, I'm just mentioning the things that allow Earth to be created so that it can sustain life, but I haven't mentioned the fact that the Earth is the perfect distance from the sun, the Goldilocks distance from the sun. I haven't mentioned that it has a clear atmosphere, which is essential for life. I haven't mentioned that it is tilted at exactly 23.5 degrees, that gives us seasons so that we can have replenishment. I haven't mentioned that we have plate tectonics. Not all planets have them. So that it allows nutrient replenishment from underneath. That it has a moon. That it has just one moon. That it has an especially large moon. All of these things are just off the top of my mind here. These are the things that are essential for life. God has created you in a perfect Goldilocks universe so that He can have a relationship with you. Do you sense that God made an incredibly fine-tuned universe for us? We engage in apologetics because in doing so, we are taking part in grace by defending and confirming the gospel. Do you see that the Bible has nothing to fear when faced with the findings of science? After all, the Bible is true. So everything that is in science will discover that the Bible is true. The Bible doesn't have anything to be afraid of science. The Bible's descriptions are what reality really is. Science only proves the Bible. Proverbs 28 says this: "The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion." You can be bold as a lion. You, as a follower of Jesus, have nothing to fear. Well, I'm a little bit behind. I went a little bit over today, so let me see if we do have any questions that I can answer before we conclude in our worship time. Okay. Update on my mother-in-law. Good news. All we need is faith. Blind faith can be dangerous because there are certain terrorists in the Middle East that are exercising on blind faith that is not rooted in a foundation. So faith does have to be something that is from the Bible, from what really is, from what actually is there. And that's another thing that we just have nothing to fear because the Bible describes what really happened, how we all came about. So we have nothing to fear in discovering these